Welcome to Bereans at the Gate. This is our video blog for October 8th, 2018. Joining me today are Bert Wheeler and Mark Clausen. Gentlemen, how you doing?
Pretty well.
We are missing Dr. Jeff Heyman. He is at an official function of some sort, I think, because where all functions happen in the Department of Business, from what I understand. So we miss Dr. Heyman. We will see him next time, I'm sure. Gentlemen, I guess we have to wrap up our Kavanaugh discussion. This has been ongoing for several weeks, and there's still a lot to talk about, I think. Part of me wanted to move on. Another part of me thinks that we really have an obligation to discuss this a little bit more. So I guess first question for you all, what is Kavanaugh and this whole affair, what has it revealed about our culture? Have we learned anything about the United States of America through this process that we didn't know before?
Actually, that's an interesting question, because you would think we were polarized, and that tends to be the view.
Right.
That it shows that we're very polarized. I am not completely convinced we're that polarized. What I see are two groups on either end that are advocating very vociferously for and against, but I don't really see the vast middle, the silent middle that hasn't said a whole lot, that's not as vocal, obviously not vocal at all. And it's hard to say how they're actually feeling about this right now, in my opinion.
Yeah.
This is just my opinion. So what I see, again, is the people who hate him, people who love him, and think that the people who hate him are terrible, and so forth, and back and forth. But the people in the middle, I don't see anything.
Do you think there is this silent middle, Bert? Do you think there is this sort of...
I don't know if there is or not. Now, I don't know what we learned, but I think that we have seen on display the division that's in our nation right now. And I'm probably one of the silent middle sort of people. But this inspired me and probably pushed me. Well, it pushed me more towards the right, I think, just with the behavior of the left, of the Democrats in this instance, I found so abominable that it has, again, I will never be a Trump always guy, but in terms of the political movement on the right, I just think that I feel closer to it than I did before. So there may be some people that are in the center, but I don't see how you could be in the center on this issue with Ford and Kavanaugh. I just don't see you either believe one or you believe the other, and then it's going to fall from there.
Yeah, I think you're right on the issue. It's going to push people one way or the other. But how far it's pushing them is what I'm not quite certain of. Like you say, you're pushed toward the right, but you're an anti-Trumper, sort of. Right?
I am.
So that doesn't make you one of those two extreme groups that I'm thinking of, right? So to speak, extreme. I don't mean extremist.
Probably still not. So I probably am more towards the center. But again, I don't feel towards the center on this thing at all.
Right. I think a lot of people probably don't on that.
Right.
Yeah. On that.
I saw an interesting tweet over the weekend, lots of interesting tweets. Someone said, if anything, Trump has revealed to us the corruption of some of our institutions because they seem to be acting in a way that he charges them with as being sort of fake news or corrupted at some level, including maybe even the Democratic Party to some degree and sort of the mainstream media also. I mean, you saw the way they behaved with the some of the charges that were particularly without foundation.
Mm-hmm.
I think Trump has probably won himself some supporters, even though his behavior continues to be somewhat boorish.
His
maybe.
tweets.
But I think events have probably come around to support him, whether it's because of him or not.
Supporting, yes,
Yeah.
supporting him on that.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with
I'm not
that.
sure that people all of a sudden will become pro-Trump.
No.
But I think they're more likely to support Trump and maybe even vote for him.
Yeah.
Because of what's being revealed on the left side of our spectrum right now.
That's
Well, we'll
possible.
see, because that's the way that we see this. One other thing that I believe has been illustrated here is just simply a difference on how you interpret and see the world based on your presuppositions.
Yeah.
Because I look at it and I say, she really needs to have some corroboration.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just go on what someone thinks they remembered from a long time ago.
Right.
But I know people that look at it and say, no, why in the world would anyone ever do this to themselves unless it was actually factually true?
Right.
And so I think we're seeing that as well.
Yeah, but I don't think as many. I think most people still would say the rule of law, the basic institutions that we put in place legally and so forth, skew us towards saying we want to see evidence before we actually make up our minds that this person's guilty, before he's actually proven to be guilty by any standard at all. I think most people are on that side.
I think you're being too generous.
Too
frankly.
generous.
I really do.
All right.
I mean,
Well,
maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm overly pessimistic. I wrote a blog post today that deals with this at some level in particular. What was really shocking to me was when I watched how groups went after Jeff Flake and Lisa Murkowski and Joe Manchin in particular. And a lot of it was sort of driven by just people who had suffered sexual trauma of
Sure.
some kind, and they would say, here's what happened to me, therefore you need to reconsider your vote for Brett Kavanaugh. I don't know how to deal with that. I don't know how to process that sort of an argument. It seems to be so far removed from the rule of law and due process and equality before the law. And then Jeff Flake says that had an effect on him.
He says.
Murkowski said
Yeah.
the women sat in my office and told me these things. Now I have to rethink my. How is there even a connection between a survivor's tale and what happened to Brett Kavanaugh or Christine Ford?
Yeah, I agree with that, but I'm going to go out on a limb here and say those people are relatively few in numbers. They're vocal, but they're relatively few in numbers. Relatively, I'm going to say.
I hope you're right, but I worry. I think more like what Bert is saying. It reveals a different view of reality.
It's there.
If you think what happened to you should matter to that process, that's a certain way of thinking that I think is pretty prevalent in our culture.
And there are people there, and I think it's more prevalent among younger people than it is older people. Just if you look at the statistics regarding the viewpoints of millennials and Generation Zs versus
Right.
the older generations, there is that divide. But that divide is not absolute either. So I think you do see divisions even within them. So I don't know. I'm going to go out on a limb and still stick with what I said.
I don't know, Bert. What do you think?
I think that the younger people think differently about the way they process and hear things than we do. And when I look at a text, so you've got the copy here of this article, I think that there's an author that wants to communicate something to me, and that's what I want to know. I'm not certain if that hasn't been that objectivity, a little bit more objective, even though I realize the difficulties inherent in me knowing exactly what this person wants to say. I still think that right now, amongst people that I don't know the exact age that are younger than us, that I don't know if they have that. They see more the meaning in the text is what they want to put into it themselves, what they infer this way. And when you have that in a culture, then there tends to be, again, just a great deal of difficulty even communicating with one another. That's what I think we're seeing here. Is I do agree with you about the poles, the extremes on this issue. And I'm sure that there are most of us who are more towards the center, but we're not meeting in the center anymore. We're fighting on the edges and screaming at each other rather than meeting in the center and talking about it and trying to come to some sort of reasonable, rational conclusion. But I think there's a rational conclusion, and I'm not sure that a lot of people believe that there's a rational conclusion anymore.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I think what you're looking at is a more empathetic kind of group rather than a rational kind of group that
Sure.
wants to evaluate
Right.
purely on the data, right? I think that's generally true if you take Zs and millennials, generalizing a bit, but taking them as a group. But I don't know. I'm just not convinced there are enough of them to make this a huge division yet. This may change down the generations.
You're just assuming that the people who aren't talking have a different point of view.
I'm kind of assuming that.
I'm worried that
Yeah.
the people who aren't talking just aren't talking. They still have these points of view. They're just not talking about it a whole lot.
I guess we'll find
We'll
out.
see. Yeah, we'll see. Maybe November will help us
Yeah.
figure out what
I think
exactly
it
is
will.
happening. I do think, though, what we're looking at is a galvanization of the right in a way that we did not see before Kavanaugh.
That is true.
So I think that
Well, I
could help
agree.
the president. We'll see.
Yeah.
From my perspective, I felt like a little lamb lost in the political world with no home, and I still feel that way. I still do feel that way. But this has pushed me more in the direction of the Republican Party. Again, simply just based on what I think the Democrats did was just unconscionable.
Yeah, I agree. It's made me more cynical about politics in general.
It has me as well.
In general.
That says a great deal for people like us. I mean, honestly, we come to
just-
this already fairly cynical because of what we know and what we observe. This is jaded. in
Yeah,
a
it
way,
makes you
too.
jaded.
I would agree with that.
So,
Let's move ahead a little bit. What do we think about Kavanaugh in the court? Are we looking at all the conservatives are convinced we're going to overturn Roe v. Wade. Liberals are convinced we're going to do it as well. Do you think we're going to see significant changes on the court because of Kavanaugh or his arrival? What do you think, Mark?
nope. I don't think we're going to see significant changes. In fact, I don't think it would matter a whole lot if it hadn't been Kavanaugh. The court generally is loath to just radically overturn decisions.
Yeah.
It may eat into or erode some of the precedent of
Right.
set by decisions made in the past, but it won't do this wholesale. You may come 30 years down the road and look back and say, what happened to Roe versus Wade?
Right.
But it's not going to happen overnight
Right.
in a single decision.
So you don't think it's very likely the court's going to go that far? At least not anytime soon.
Not anytime soon. Yeah, I doubt it.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I think when you look at Kavanaugh's replacing Justice Kennedy, Kennedy was really fairly conservative in a lot of parts of constitutional law.
Yeah.
You look at freedom of
Free
speech, and
speech,
other
yeah.
issues. He's pretty conservative.
He was.
He was fair. He was pretty progressive though on things like gay rights
Gay
and
rights,
abortion.
yeah.
And so, even if those things do change a little, I'm not sure you're going to see this wholesale overturning of a lot of precedents. I think I probably agree with you. So I wonder whether we'll look back at this and say this was much ado about nothing. All this angst about Kavanaugh, and really it's not much of a change.
But it could make a difference in some cases that we don't expect, that deal with constitutional issues, but they're not the glamorous cases,
Sure.
glamour cases.
Right.
If he's a constitutionalist,
Yeah.
as he says he is, and
Right.
everybody says he is, then he may look at the Constitution, read it in a way that's originalist, and
Yeah.
he's going to reach some different decisions on those cases that we just don't know anything about,
Yeah.
right?
I think you're probably right. And my guess is even if he ends up being relatively conservative, I think Roberts emerges as the swing vote on the court.
That's probably true.
Yeah. As a Chief Justice, he'll
Yeah.
be interested in keeping the court within
Mm-hmm.
certain boundaries and certain levels of permissibility, and I think he might become that sort of back and forth member that Kennedy was.
Yeah,
We'll see.
could be.
We'll see. All right, let's think about this from a biblical perspective, and as Christians, as we look at our fragmented culture, polarized, whether you think it's a silent middle or not, I don't know. How do we advise people, students and other people, to interact with this culture,
Yeah.
to heal it maybe in some way? Maybe I'm being overly optimistic, but what can we as believers do to bring comfort to this culture war that just continues to flare up? I mean, Bert, what do you think?
Well, I don't think there's any short-term
Yeah.
easy fix here.
Right.
But we need to be very humble and be very loving on an individual basis. Not so much in the political sphere, although we do there also, but just in our everyday communication, conversations, and life, we need to manifest the character of Christ to those around us. And I think that's what the church is really called to do. And so, I don't know, if you look at what we do in the public square, then we should be good citizens and follow our consciences in the way that we believe the Lord is leading us. So I don't think there's any politically any big shake thing
Yeah.
that we can do or that we should do.
Right. But so you
Okay.
seem to think that if there's going to be change, it's going to become through those relationships that exist outside of the public square? Is that fair?
I think largely that is the model of the New Testament church at this time, and I think we've kind of drifted away from it a little bit, trying to make things happen objectively through the public square without having the internal transformation occur prior to the changes happening in the culture.
I think that's a pretty fair way to start. Yeah, grace and truth we want to convey. And then the other thing I would add to that, I agree with what you said. The other thing I would add to that is when you do talk about political issues, I would try to find some common ground to start with. And I've done this before. When I spoke to someone a few years ago, I said, "Okay, you're a socialist." He says he's a socialist. I said, "We both agree to the goal. We want a particular goal. Do we agree to the goal that we want to see achieved?" Yes. So how do we achieve that? We need to figure out how we can come together and think about ways that can achieve that would transcend our radical divides about method, socialism versus some other means of achieving that. Now, we didn't get there, but I think you've got to try to start with the common ground, look for policy solutions that both could agree to, that could be nonpartisan, so to speak, less radioactive. Right? It's difficult, but it's hard work. It's really hard work.
I agree with you in theory, and I seem to say that a lot to my students. In theory, this makes a lot of sense. In practicality, our parties aren't set up to allow for those
No,
kinds
our
of
parties
discussions. Our interest groups aren't set up to allow for these kinds of discussions. Our voters aren't all that interested in hearing about their senators talking to senators from the other party and compromising on issues. I agree with what you're saying. I just don't know if there is a mechanism in place to make that happen in the public square. That's my problem right now.
It's going to take time.
Yeah.
It's going to take time to get
Yeah.
there, but I think that's what we need to work for eventually in the long run.
I don't disagree with that.
Should the Senate be doing that?
That's what it's designed to do,
Right,
right?
right.
That's what it's designed to do. And
Cooler
that's why you
heads
have
prevail.
the filibuster. That's why you have the 60 vote threshold for cloture and other things. But the Senate's pretty broken right now.
It does
I think
seem
you
that
even
way.
and I think you
Man.
look at that Judiciary Committee. It's a microcosm of the body.
Yeah.
It's just broken.
Yeah, they went crazy.
Yeah, and it is an institution in need of some reform at some level. Yeah, I'd say abolish 17th Amendment, but that's probably not very popular right now.
Probably isn't.
But changes need to come, I think, at some level.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
All right, well, thanks, gentlemen. I appreciate it. We will see Dr. Heyman next week, and we will see you, our viewers, next week as well. Thank you.